Mr. Gillespie may have forced you to learn about every single election in U.S. history, and he may have forced you to memorize each and every single president America has ever had, plus the amount of terms they served. But did he ever tell you what happened to them after their presidency?
Did they go on to live happy lives? Did the presidency crush their mind, soul, and body? You don't know. In just 10 minutes, Shiraz and I will explain what happened to all the presidents in their post-presidential lives.
After being the iconic first president that he was, George Washington moved on to create the largest distillery of his time, producing 11,000 gallons of whiskey yearly.
John Adams was boring. He just lived on a farm with his wife.
Jefferson founded the University of Virginia in Charlottesville in 1819.
Since Madison was previously a plantation owner, he returned to his plantation where he kept slaves. However, he ultimately became part of the American Colonization Society, which tried to help return slaves to Africa.
Monroe actually stayed in the White House for 3 weeks after serving his terms because his wife was too sick to travel. Once home, he enjoyed spending time with his family and overseeing the activities of his farm.
After losing re-election, JQA served 9 terms in Congress, working all the way up to the end of his life. He collapsed on the House floor and died 2 days later.
Jackson returned home and retired, yet stayed politically active. He campaigned for his successor, Martin Van Buren, and ended up becoming more popular after leaving office than he was when he entered.
Van Buren's political activity ended with his presidency. He focused on writing, traveling, and spending time with his children and grandchildren.
William Henry Harrison died just 32 days into his role as president and is said to have died of pneumonia after catching a cold.
Tyler highly advocated the prevention of the Civil War and attempted to stop any secessions by chairing a peace convention. Days before the first meeting, he died.
Polk retired after his first term and was relieved to be free from public duty. He toured the southern states, feeling overjoyed by the festive crowds, but had to cut his tour short due to illness and fatigue.
After a day of 4th of July celebrations, Taylor felt hot and tired. He drank iced water and large quantities of cherries and began to suffer severe stomach pains. Taylor's body began to reject fluids altogether. Cause of his death, overdose on cherries.
After losing his election as the presidential candidate of the Know Nothing Party, Fillmore retired to Buffalo and remarried. His previous wife and daughter both died from disease. When the Civil War began, he helped organize enlistments and drives until he died of a stroke in 1874.
Pierce was extremely vocal about his points throughout the Civil War, earning him multiple enemies. Being termed as a traitor by his fellow Northerners, he fell into the deep and dark hole of alcohol addiction.
With most of the blame for the Civil War being placed upon Buchanan, many people attacked him. Although he tried to explain his side of the story by publishing a book, he was largely ignored and vanished from the public eye, only interacting with close friends and family.
Lincoln was assassinated.
Johnson became the only U.S. president to serve in the Senate after his presidential tenure, but it didn't last long. He had a stroke that same year.
When out of office, Grant traveled the world for 2 years, meeting many important international figures. He recorded his experiences in his memoirs, which are regarded today as some of the most important works of American nonfiction.
After retiring, Hayes devoted his life to education of both black and white children because he believed that a greater education of children would create greater equality and democracy.
Garfield was shot in the back. He died.
Arthur didn't seek a second term because he had been diagnosed with a fatal case of Blight's disease, which made him extremely weak physically. It killed him in 1886.
Benjamin Harrison moved to San Francisco, taught at Stanford, and married his late wife's niece, who was 25 years younger than him. His 2 adult children did not approve.
Cleveland played the stock market so he could support his family. Fortunately for him, he made some big bank.
McKinley was assassinated.
Roosevelt started off by embarking on an African safari and collecting specimens while traveling. Upon his return, he attempted to run for re-election and continued to hold heavy influence upon politics and policies on the Great War before he died in his sleep in 1919.
After his presidency, Taft's indulgent appetite put him into morbid obesity. However, he did achieve his goal of being appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was also the last president to have facial hair.
Wilson suffered his second serious stroke during his presidency, and his wife, Edith, made many decisions in his name, becoming undercover, what some historians like to call the first female president. He died from a stroke and heart complications.
Harding left office being remembered as one of America's worst presidents. News of his extramarital affairs became public after his death, further tarnishing Harding's reputation.
Coolidge chose not to run for a second term as president and was relieved of the delusions of public life. He was also devastated by the death of his 16-year-old son, Calvin Jr., and never fully recovered.
Hoover continued to attack government program in the books he wrote and publicized his views on his opposition of American involvement with Korea and Vietnam.
FDR died during his 4th term as president of a cerebral hemorrhage at his Warm Springs retreat at age 63. It shocked the entire world during the final months of World War II.
Truman returned to a boring, uneventful life of writing memoirs, taking long walks, and overseeing the construction of his presidential library.
Eisenhower continued to provide advice to presidents after himself, such as JFK and LBJ, but suffered from 2 heart attacks that eventually led to his passing in 1969.
JFK was assassinated.
LBJ suffered a heart attack on his Texas ranch just one day after learning that peace was at hand in Vietnam.
Nixon spent much of his time distraught and disoriented, and it was announced after his death that he suffered from Alzheimer's disease.
Considering he had been a very good athlete during his youth, being offered professional football careers by the Green Bay Packers, Ford continued to enjoy sports such as golf after his time in office. He also served on a number of corporate boards and commissions while also writing about domestic and foreign policy issues.
After Carter's service in office, he underwent surgery to remove a mass from his liver where cancer was discovered. Despite this, Carter became the longest living president at 94 years and 172 days old.
Reagan revealed in a handwritten letter that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and lived out the rest of his days with his wife in his home in Los Angeles.
George H.W. Bush made many appearances in politics after his service in office due to the election of his eldest son in the 2000 election. Facing many illnesses and a persistent fever, he was confined to a wheelchair, but continued to skydive a number of milestone birthdays, including his 80th, 85th, and 90th.
Clinton advocated greatly for his wife, Hillary Clinton, when she ran in the 2016 presidential election, and spoke at length about their past together, their marriage, their family life, her tenacity, and his overall respect for her.
It was revealed to George W. Bush that he had a serious heart condition, bringing him away from his tenure in the White House, resulting in him being viewed as a wise elder. He continued to stay somewhat involved in politics, mainly to call out Trump and his fake news.
Obama was the, and I cannot emphasize this enough, bomb. The Obama family moved to a home within Washington, D.C. to allow their youngest daughter, Sasha, to continue school there. He urged his audience to maintain hope in the face of troubling times. Big, big troubling times.
Hopefully, we'll know what happened to Trump after his presidency within the next year or so.
Hopefully.